Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Before we begin, if the sisters would like to come downstairs, we have the separation. We'll give you a few minutes to join us, bi'idhnillah ta'ala. So we'll start in a few minutes, inshallah. Jazakumullahu khair. Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wassalatu wassalam ala ashraf al-anbiya wal mursaleen, Nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'een, amma ba'd. So welcome to tonight's session. I'm going to start off by saying that I know the title was a bit strange, right? From Kufa to codification. And then no one realized that this would be a talk about the life of Abu Hanifa, Imam Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah ta'ala. So my apologies for that. That was probably a design choice that I made, which I was not a very good design choice. That's on me, not on the administration. Okay, so with that said, there's a couple of things that I wanted to start off with, and that is when we look at the life of Imam Abu Hanifa, and what we want to look at tonight specifically is how does his life, rahimahullah ta'ala, how does it relate to our life today? And there's a couple of points that are very interesting where we can see like where he was brought up, the time, the place, the circumstance, and compared to where we are today. And when I say where we are, I mean in the 21st century, in the United States, in the environment that they're in, and we're in, and the type of people that we come across, right? Because really that's what the benefit of speaking about the people of the past, or one of the benefits, is that we take from their extraordinary life and we try to take lessons from it so that it can have an impact on us and our Islam and our interaction with the people around us, and so on and so forth. So I'll start off with the idea of who was Imam Abu Hanifa. Now right off the bat, you'll hear that people will say that he was not an Arab. Okay, and a lot of people take pride in that. Well, he was not an Arab and so on. But I wanted us to understand this in the context of why that's even an important point. Like, is this some sort of a racist point or something? Like, oh, he wasn't an Arab. Actually, there's a lot more to it. Because we know that when Islam came to the scene, it completely rearranged the ties that were important to people. So in a society where tribal ties and lineage and race and all of that, and all of that is very important, it starts to break the paradigm. Such that you have a person like Bilal radiallahu anhu who gets elevated, and someone like Abu Lahab, who is related directly to the Prophet ﷺ, is degraded. Because now this taxonomy, this understanding of what's important and what's not important starts to shift. By the time you get to right before the time of Imam Abu Hanifa, there was this interesting phenomena that happened. That phenomena was that when you look at after the time of the Sahaba, after the time of their successors, the tabi'in, and then the tabi'in, the successors of the successors. What you have in place is that the majority of scholars were not Arab. It's very interesting. So there's a narration here that one of the Umayyad caliphs, right, Khalifas, he asks a scholar, Ata, he says, tell me, do you know of the leading scholars of the major cities? Right, so the major cities at that time were Mecca, were Medina, were Damascus, were Basra, Kufa, these type of places. So Ata says, yes, of course. So he asked him, he says, tell me about Medina. Who was the leading scholar of Medina? So Ata says, it's Nafi. Nafi, the Mawla of Abdullah ibn Umar. So the Mawla, this is like a freed slave. Now let me stop here for a second, because I know the word slave is actually quite loaded. When you would have the understanding of slavery that we have in the modern context, especially within the United States, there's this type of image that arises when we think about slavery, that it has to be inherently, there's certain problems with it and so on and so forth, and that slavery is inherently violent and so on. Now I'm not going to unpack all of slavery in the modern world versus slavery in the Islamic world. But when you have a mawla, a freed slave, one of the interesting aspects of the Islamic paradigm is that the freed slave can actually become the leader of the people, okay? Where you don't find that phenomenon by and large in other communities that practice slavery, by and large. With certain exceptions amongst the Romans and things like that, you did find that, but by and large you don't find that. In the Islamic tradition, you do find that. So a mawla is a freed slave, meaning someone that's now, he was let's say captured in war, and he served, like in the, let's say in this case, Abdullah ibn Umar, who is the son of Umar ibn Khattab, his slave was Nafi, and then he was freed. So he's known as the mawla of Abdullah ibn Umar. Now, most of the times when slaves are being captured, they're not being captured from local Arabs. This is when the Muslims are going out, especially in the early days, they're going out to the Byzantine Empire and they're going out to the Persian Empire. These are the two grand empires, the great empires of their time, and the people that are being captured are generally not Arabs. In fact, most of them, we'd say, are not Arabs. So coming back, this caliph asked Ata, was he an Arab or was he a mawla? So he says that he was a mawla. He was not an Arab, right? He was a freed slave. He says, okay, what about Mecca? Who's the leading scholar of Mecca? He says it's Ata ibn Abi Rabi'ah. So he asked him, was he an Arab or was he a mawla? Was he an Arab or a non-Arab? He says he was a mawla. He said, okay, look, tell me about Yemen. So Ata says it's Taus. He goes, was he an Arab or was he a mawla? He says he was a mawla, right? He was a non-Arab. He said, okay, wait, what about Yamama? Yamama is like Central Arabia. He says the leading scholar of that place, of Yamama, is a man by the name of Yahya ibn Kathir. So what was the question he asked? Was he a Arab or a mawla? He was a mawla, right? He says, okay, what about Damascus? He says, okay, there was Mahus who's there. He's also a mawla. He says, Iraq, Mahmud ibn Marhad, he is also a mawla. Basra, Hassan al-Basri, right? Also a mawla. And then he finally comes to Kufa. He says, tell me about Kufa. He said, the leading scholar of Kufa is none other than Ibrahim al-Nakhai. Was he a mawla or was he an Arab? He said he was an Arab. So the Khalifa says to him, he says, good, because I thought that we were going to keep going, we would not find one trace of Arabs amongst the entire list of the leading scholars. Okay? Now, why am I mentioning this? Is that there's a certain phenomena, and scholars looked at this and to say, like, why is it that the majority of scholarship is happening at the hands of the mawali, the freed slaves who are generally non-Arabs? And there's a couple of theories. One theory is that because the Arabs at that time are going out and are on the frontiers of spreading Islam, they're active in jihad. They're active in going out, and so they're not spending time with scholarship in the sense that they're not spending a lot of time with it. Their concern is more of expanding the empire. Now that's one general theory. The second theory actually comes from Ibn Khaldun, rahimahullah ta'ala. And he says something interesting. He says when you look at Islam and expanding into civilizations, because that's what they were doing, in the beginning, in the early days, Islam is now moving out to the Byzantium Empire and the Persian Empire. He says what you have in the cities at that time are people that are already literate. They're already engaged with concepts that are complex, like philosophy, theology, even law, and things like that. So who are the Mawali? The Mawali are the remnants of those people anyway. So they already have a backdrop which is somewhat missing in a certain sense. Now I want to stop here for a second. These are the two general reasons, and I think there is some basis for these reasons. Like I think that this idea of the remnants of the civilizations, the civilizational remnants, and also the fact that the Arabs were out making jihad. What is my basis for this? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentions Surah Tawbah. He says, وَمَا كَانَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ لِيَنْفِرُوا. It is not for the believers to go forth kaffa, all together, all at once. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues. He goes, for there should separate from every division of them a group remaining to obtain an understanding of the deen and warn the people when they return that they may be cautious. Now, it's very interesting that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala here is saying that when the people are going out for jihad, when you're going to go out and fight, let a faction of them stay back so that they can have a fiqh, an understanding. They can study the deen. And it's interesting that why is this dynamic important? If you consider just warfare in general, when people go out to war, like in the modern context, do you think someone that goes out in the battlefield, experiences all of that, and then comes back, will be the same as someone that has the luxury of sitting down calmly and studying? It's a completely different dynamic, right? No doubt there's a certain spiritual reality and experience that someone who's gone out to make jihad has that the scholar who's never gone out does not have, no doubt about it. But at the same time, the level of scholarship you can have when things are at rest, things are at a time of peace, is very different than when you are out in battle. Now, what's the lesson here? The lesson here is that each and every single one of us, no one is going out, as far as I know, is going out to fight. We are in a state of relative peace, tranquility. And so the first thing we get is that one of the aspects, one of the lessons we can learn is that scholarship happens in the state that you're in right now. You are in a position that far surpasses other places in the world. Even places like Gaza, for instance. The scholarship that you will have is going to be different than the scholarship that they're going to have. Now, I want to be careful here, because in this discussion we may tend to think that this concept of literacy, of scholarship, is relegated only to the idea of studying something, like a book or like reading or something like that. And our concept of knowledge then becomes pigeonholed. The reality is that when we think about knowledge, knowledge is not just information, right? That's one aspect. True knowledge, and if you were at the talk last week that I did on Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, rahimahullah ta'ala, we said that knowledge is not just information, but rather it's something that is also transformation. Meaning it's not something that you just learn, but it actually has an impact on you. That's why when there was a man that walked across who wasn't very learned in the company of Imam Ahmad, and he said that this man is like, I'm looking at a man from Jannah. And the other scholars around Imam Ahmad said, you know, yeah, Imam, like he's a merchant. What does he know? Imam Ahmad said, but no, he has the fruits of knowledge. Meaning he may not have the technical know-how, but he has inculcated within himself the very purpose of knowledge, okay? Now, coming back, we said that there's this idea of literacy. And this is something that, at least in the modern world, I think that we need to kind of clarify. And why we need to clarify that is because when you have, let's say, colonial powers that entered into the Muslim world, or entered into what they call the global south, they brought with them a concept of literacy that many of us adopted. And that had to do with literacy is limited to reading and writing and calculating. And this, I'll be honest, is a bit problematic. I'll tell you why. If you take something like artificial intelligence and you trace its genealogy back, okay, now I'm not going to do that tonight, it's a bit complicated, but you trace it all the way back, you find that, first of all, artificial intelligence is based on what they call large language models. It's based on a certain concept of language, which goes back to a certain concept within which language you choose. So if you compare, for instance, Western languages with, let's say, the Arabic language, or let's say Hebrew as well, but Hebrew is kind of an afterthought, right? Because they didn't, the first Hebrew dictionary doesn't come up till the 10th century or so. But anyways, but if you compare the two, you find that the difference in the language itself will tell you how we understand knowledge. And I'll try to make this as easy as possible. When you look at a language like English, it is what's known as a phonetic language. It's based on phonemes. Phonemes are the smallest unit of sound. So you have a, ba, which relates to A, B, C, right? A, ba, ka, and so on. The smallest unit of sound in English, and by the way, its predecessor goes all the way back to Greek, is meaningless. In other words, phonemes are meaningless bits that come together to then give you a word that means something, right? So ka is meaningless, a is meaningless, ta is meaningless, okay? When you compare that to something like the Arabic language, you find that the Arabic language is not phonetic. In other words, the smallest units are not meaningless, but the smallest units of sound actually have meaning. They're morphemic, as it's known as. That's why it's when your tajweed teacher tells you, or your Quran teacher tells you, you have to focus on makharij. You have to focus on how the sound is coming out, because the smallest unit of meaning, the sound of it has meaning. Okay? Now, what does that mean? Let me give you an example, so this is not getting too abstract. Okay? So for instance, when you hear Ar-Rahman, now there's a certain sound you're hearing. There's a certain elongation, right? It goes on a certain verb form. Then you hear Ar-Rahim, it's elongation. Again, it goes to the sound of each individual letter. That sound itself is going to give you meaning, because Rahman, it's heavy, Rahman. And Rahman refers to that type of mercy that it's very full and heavy. Meaning like you're standing on the shore and waves and waves and waves of mercy are coming down upon you. It's heavy, and its sound, Rahman, is heavy. Rahim, the sound is elongated. And this mercy is that mercy which is long term. It's never ending almost. So every point in your life is from the mercy of Allah. You're breathing, you're eating, you're standing, you're sitting, everything is part. So Rahim, but that elongation that you hear is built into the Arabic language, because the letters, or not the letters, the smallest unit of meaning, of sound, has meaning. And this is a fundamental difference between English and its predecessor Greek and the Arabic language. Now, why is that important? That becomes important because what is AI built upon? Doesn't start with the Arabic language. It starts with languages that go back to Greek, which, like I said, were not based on a sound that's rooted in it. And it goes to a type of abstraction that goes back to Plato. Now, I don't want to get too far into this. Eventually, it comes to artificial intelligence, okay? When you think about artificial intelligence, what's right in the name? It's artificial. And if you want to look at what's the opposite, you would say you have artificial and then you have natural. One of the qualities of the Arabic language is that it points you to things that are real and natural. Always, when you study a word in Arabic, you will always find it tied to something that's physical, that's real, that's a phenomenon, okay? So for instance, the word aql, right? It's related to this concept of the iqal, the thing that's worn by the Arabs that you see, you know, they had that headband that they have. That goes back to, this was something they would carry and tie the leg of the camel. Why would they do that? So it doesn't run away. So the aql, the intellect, it's something that tie you to a certain position of strength. So you notice the meaning is tied to something in the real world. But in English and other such languages, that's not necessary. You can have an abstraction. And from that abstraction, you can build an entire artificial world that we're seeing today in artificial intelligence. Now, why am I on this tangent? I'm on this tangent because when we were talking about city centers and people who are literate, just because they know how to read and write doesn't automatically put them at a level of those that don't know how to read and write. Reading and writing is not a sign of what you may call intellect, rationality, and so on. And we have to get this very clear, because when colonial powers came into our lands, they almost told us that this is what is rationality. This is intellect, right? Years ago, it'd be science is the only way to truth. You would have, this sort of axiomatic truth. Science is the only way. And now you find that that's falling apart. Okay, coming back to the life of Imam Abu Hanifa. So Imam Abu Hanifa, who was he? He was not an Arab. And, people say, okay, well, he was a Persian. But in fact, his lineage goes back. His grandfather was, if you think about the Persian Empire, it was very vast, and it had among its empire, among the cities, was the city of Kabul in Afghanistan today. So his grandfather was in fact from Kabul. Yes, he was Persian because it was part of the Persian Empire, but he goes back to Afghanistan, to the city of Kabul. Now, his father was a merchant. He would sell clothing. And I want us to, again, to think about this for a second, because Imam Abu Hanifa also becomes a merchant, and he sells clothing. When you open the books of fiqh, of jurisprudence, at the time of Imam Abu Hanifa and slightly before, you find that many of the books cover the question of what to do if you don't have clothing. Meaning, how are you going to pray? For us, in the 21st century, living like, when would you not have clothing? But people were so poor at that time that they would have one article of clothing. So now if you have one article of clothing and you need to wash it, you basically have to go off somewhere, no one sees you, you take it off and you wash it. And you don't have clothes for a while because they're drenched or they're dirty or whatever it may be. They may have some najas on it. So those questions arise. The fact that Imam Abu Hanifa is a clothing or sells clothing, and his father sold clothing, points to the fact that he was actually very wealthy. Why? Because clothing was a luxury at that time. And to be able to sell clothing means that you are making quite a bit of money. So he starts off his career, you can say, as someone who was a merchant. But in the marketplaces of Kufa at that time, you have a time and a place where there's quite a bit of turmoil. Okay, so now if you look at the Muslim world, you find that if you compare the city of Medina to the city of Kufa, the city of Medina is where you live and breathe Islam. And this is where it's the city of Imam Malik. And because everything is dictated by Islam, it's like I said, you live, you breathe, you eat, you sleep, you're close to the Prophet's Masjid sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Imam Malik now, one of his principles is that you take the etiquette of the people of Medina. Okay, that's one of his. Why? Because this is the embodiment of the Medina of the Prophet ﷺ, right? The word deen, you can say it means like worldview. I know people translate that as religion. So you have deen, you have the word Medina, which is the place where deen is enacted. So the social, political, economic reality of deen is a Medina. And what is the best Medina? Medina to Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? So therefore, Imam Malik, this is his fiqh, this is where he's coming from. He makes this as one of his principles, that you take Ahlul Medina, the practices of Ahlul Medina have legal weight. Let's compare that now to Kufa and where Imam Abu Hanifa is. In Kufa, well, let me give you a little bit of backdrop. How did Kufa come about? First of all, Kufa is a kind of like a garrison town. When the Muslims are expanding, Umar ibn Khattab comes up with this particular town, makes it into a city. It's like a makeshift city. Because A, to cover certain distances. B, some of the narrations mention that some of the Sahaba didn't like water. So to get to places quickly, they would rather not take a sea route, but rather come up with a city so that they can just settle there. So Kufa becomes this type of garrison town. And by the time you get to Ali radiallahu anh, he actually moves the capital to Kufa because many of the Sahaba were there. But also because Kufa is kind of in the midst, is at the crossroads of a previous empire, which was the Persian Empire. And its physical, geographic location is such that there's many travelers and things like that that are going through. You have a deep mix of various worldviews. So you have a Christian population that's there. You have new issues in Islamic doctrine that arise. For instance, the Khawarij, right? The Kharijites. This was a certain sect within Islam that took a kind of a literalist interpretation of things and basically said that if you don't take our interpretation, you're outside the fold of Islam, right? The Khawarij are at this time. The Mu'tazila, over-rationalizing things. It was in this environment that Imam Abu Hanifa has a shop in the marketplace. So when he's now growing up, it's not that he's just selling clothing, but he's interacting with all of these different ideologies. And one of the places that he would debate people would be in the marketplace. You know, much like if you think about today and you go on YouTube and you start looking at, Muslim Christian debates and things like that, and you look at Speaker's Corner or something, people, they're always debating. But you really have to ask the quality of the debates. Are these ulama that are debating, or are these just people that read a few books and now they want to show the supremacy of Islam and so they're debating? More likely than not, these are not people that are ulama, scholars that are debating, people that have studied for years. These are people that have some knowledge of Islam and they want to now debate. So similarly, Imam Abu Hanifa, in the beginning of his career, in the beginning, he's in a marketplace. He's interacting with many different types of people, dealing with ideologies, arguing with people, and so on. So debate is part and parcel of this. So one of the scholars, seeing his sharpness, seeing how quick-witted he is, he says, "Who do you go to?" Asks him, like, who do you visit? Imam Abu Hanifa mentions that I go to so-and-so, like so-and-so business person to get my merchandise, wholesaler or whatever it is. He says, no, I mean amongst the scholars. So Imam Abu Hanifa says, no, I don't go to any scholars. He said, someone like you needs to visit scholarship and spend time studying. Imam Abu Hanifa says this kind of changed his entire paradigm, his own understanding of himself and what he should be spending his time with. It is from this point that he goes and he starts to study, and he picks a scholar by the name of Hamad, and he spends most of his time with Hamad, learning. Now, so this was his backdrop in terms of his own, the backdrop of Kufa, where he is, and where he's getting the beginning of his knowledge. What did he look like? This is another interesting one. So they say that he was of medium build, he had a long beard, and they say he has an imposing presence. The marks of sujood were on his forehead, and in some narrations, he had lines on his cheeks due to the crying. And he was always known to smile, rahimahullah ta'ala. So very pleasant personality. And he always loved to dress well. Okay? So remember, he's a merchant, and the fact that he's a merchant actually, allows him to have access to good clothing. So he used to dress well. He's very wealthy. And that wealth also gave him another advantage. The advantage was that he could be disconnected from government issues, political affairs, right? So by the end, so Imam Abu Hanifa, by the way, straddles two different empires, you would say, the Umayyads and the Abbasids. So when it comes to the time of the Abbasids, one of the leaders of the Abbasids, right, Abu Mansur, he asks him, he says, why don't you become the head judge? Now the thing is, if you are studying, most people that are in the domain of Islamic scholarship are going to be poor. And many of them work for the Khalifa, and they're part of the courtesan debates and things like that go on. Imam Abu Hanifa didn't have that issue because he was financially independent. So when Abu Mansur asked him, like, why don't you become the head qadi, the head judge? And by the way, let's stop here for a second. Why does he want him to be the head judge in the first place? Because by this year, he's talking about maybe he's, very later on in his life, he's got a reputation for being this amazing scholar and so on. If the Khalifa can get him on his side, it means that now he's going to have the ability to influence him and be able to kind of take certain rulings and impose them, okay? This is very different when you think about the Christian world. A lot of times when we talk about the Sharia and the idea that the Sharia was that which was dominant, even in the domain of politics and economics and other things, people tend to think, okay, it must have been a theocracy. A theocracy is a very Christian concept, because a theocracy, it indicates that all of the power is with one individual. Okay, let's say it's the Pope. The Pope is the one that says, okay, this is halal and this is haram. So a theocracy means that a person has infallibility, that they cannot be wrong. And then that eventually gets transferred in Europe to the divine right of kings. And so kings take on this sort of role, and they start saying, okay, tax these people and so on. They start making rules. Now, there's problems within Christian theology that exacerbate this, because within Christian theology, the concept of doing deeds is completely negated. In other words, your deeds don't matter. It's only your faith. But you still need law to govern the people. So when you look at early Christianity, and when it eventually gets to being in state of governance, they start borrowing heavily from Roman law that's there. Okay, you see that. With Islam, that doesn't happen. Okay, there's a native Islam from that basically gets its own laws from its own sources, which is the Quran and the Sunnah. So it grows organically, natively. And when it comes into contact with other worldviews, when it comes into Greek philosophy, when it comes into Roman law, by the time it comes into this contact, you have people like Abu Hanifa that are standing firm to be able to say, yes, we accept this, and yes, we don't accept that. In other words, the influence. What I was referring to earlier when I said, okay, so many people think that Islam is a theocracy. In fact, scholars, academics rather, not scholars, academics would say it's not a theocracy, it's what you would call nomocratic and nomocentric. So nomos means law. So what's at the center of Islamic governance is not all power by an infallible person that has direct connection to God. It is the legal system that is specifically put into place with its own axioms, its own non-negotiables, i.e. the Quran and the Sunnah. So now, when you look at the life of Imam Abu Hanifa, the ability to debate certain issues in a public setting is representative of the beauty of Islam and its jurisprudence and its governance, right? So it's not a theocracy, you could say it's a nomocracy, right? To give you a new word for your vocabulary, I'm guessing, right? Remember, so I said, in this climate where Imam Abu Hanifa is now in, there is a lot of worldviews and ideas that are coming. He's a merchant, he's discussing these things. Now, we talked about Imam Malik. We said that Imam Malik, by and large, was a person of, well, we didn't say this, but we're going to say it now, he was a person of hadith. That's why one of the earliest works of hadith is the Muwatta of Imam Malik. Kufa doesn't have that luxury. So when it comes to hadith, at the time of Imam Abu Hanifa, the access that Imam Malik has, Imam Abu Hanifa doesn't. Okay? And this is going to be very important. In fact, you could say that this is a throwback to an earlier methodological difference. What is that methodological difference? It goes back to, how do you now take the statements of the Prophet ﷺ or the Quran, and how do you approach it? So during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, after the Battle of the Trench, because one of the Jewish tribes had renegated on their contract, the Prophet ﷺ, right after the battle, wanted to send a group of Sahaba to go and confront them. And he tells this group of Sahaba, he says, make sure that you go and you attack, but get there, do not pray Asr until you get there. Okay? Now, while the Sahaba are on the way to this Jewish encampment, right, the Jewish tribe, while they're on the way, the time for Asr is going, like Maghrib is just about to come in. So the Sahaba now, they start to now differ. One group says, no, the Prophet ﷺ said, do not pray Asr until you get to the place you're trying to get to, so we will not pray Asr until we get there. The other group said, no, the Prophet ﷺ meant by that, go quickly. He didn't mean literally pray Asr at the place, because then you'll be taking Asr out of its time. You'll be praying it qada. You'll be praying it in its misappropriated time. So you had this division now, right? Which eventually, by the way, when it goes back, the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that each community would be rewarded for what they thought in their own interpretation. But the point is, this culminates into two kind of methodological differences when it comes to fiqh. One is more of a literalist type of interpretation that's very hadith heavy, right? Which would be what eventually gets known as Ahlul Hadith. Now, not Ahlul Hadith like you find in the subcontinent, that's a different group altogether. This is Ahlul Hadith, different people, right? And then you have Ahlul Ra'i. Ahlul Ra'i are the people of opinion, right? So you could say that, and that is Kufa and the Imam Abu Hanifa, okay? Now remember, why is it that you have this difference? The fact that Imam Abu Hanifa is in a cosmopolitan environment, the fact that he's a merchant as his starting point, the fact that he's discussing all of these theological and philosophical issues that overlap with fiqh and jurisprudence means that he needs something that's very applicable to the current practical realities of human life. Okay? Remember, Medina is kind of encapsulated in a certain way. Now again, I don't want to say that Imam Malik, the Malikis are wrong and the Hanafis are right. That's not, don't make this dichotomy. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying based on where they were, for them to take the stance they took, being hadith heavy, being dependent on the customs of the people of Medina, made sense for that time. And for Imam Abu Hanifa, the fact that he's in a cosmopolitan area and he's interacting with so many different people, his method makes sense. And of course, remember we said that hadith are not systemized just yet, okay? The other aspect is that because he's now interacting with people, this also impacts his overall methodology. What do I mean by this? So when he would teach, or when he would, have sessions with other ulama and other scholars, it wouldn't be like it is now that I'm just talking to you, basically, right? I was about to say talking at you, so I hope not. But anyway, it would be more like you had scholars that were around him, and they would discuss matters, and they would go back and forth. And this type of back and forth, you find that this sort of public setting is where now people could now explore different ideas and different kind of understandings of practical realities that they're in, okay? So I wanted to kind of just mention a few of those things. And some of those are somewhat, you can say, humorous, right? So one time when he was sitting with some other scholars and they're sitting in a gathering, a man comes to him and he asks him, he says, Ya Abu Hanifa, right? He says, tell me about a man who does not hope for Jannah. He doesn't fear Allah. He doesn't fear the fire of hell. He eats maita, he eats dead meat. He prays without ruku' and without sajda, without bowing, without prostrating. He gives testimony to that which he has not seen. He dislikes the haqq, that which is certain, in other words, the haqq. He loves fitna, trials and tribulations. And he runs away from the mercy of Allah. So he says, Ya Imam Abu Hanifa, what do you say about this? So Imam Abu Hanifa presents the question to many of the people around him, and they have different opinions. Some of the scholars say he is a kafir. That's it, khalas, he's out, right? Some say no, he is a fasiq. He's a horrible, evil person, right? But he hasn't left Islam. So eventually you have these opinions. Imam Abu Hanifa, they come to his opinion. Now, before I tell you his opinion, remember, he was a person, radiallahu anh, that he was someone that was very practical. He had to deal with a number of different people, backdrops, sects, and so on. So from that position, he had this backdrop of having husn al-dhan, having the best opinion about other people, especially Muslims. Meaning when it came to making excuses for Muslims, he was very high up there. Like he would try to find as many excuses as possible. Okay? Again, remember, he's in a cosmopolitan setting with the Khawarij, with the Mu'tazila, with all of these different areas. So, with this backdrop, they ask him for his answer. What's your answer? He says, this man that you're talking about, he is a believer and he's a righteous believer. Wow. So they say, yeah, Abu Hanifa, what do you mean? Like, I mean, you heard what he said, right? He said, let me explain. He said, you start off by saying he doesn't hope for Jannah, right? And I say that this person is so overtaken by the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that his goal isn't Jannah, his motivation is the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And his motivation is meeting Allah, not Jannah. So yeah, Jannah is a good motivation, but meeting Allah and the love of Allah, that has a higher motivation. You said that he doesn't fear Allah. And I say that he doesn't fear Allah will be unjust to him. You said that he doesn't fear the fire of hell. And he says that because he fears Allah, refrains from sins, he is not expecting the hellfire because he doesn't fear it, because he trusts Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He has hope in the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You said that he eats meat, that he eats dead meat. I say, yeah, what you're talking about is fish, right? Because that's, you take it out of the ocean, it's dead, right? You're talking about fish. You say he prays without ruku' and without sajda. He prays without prostrating and without bowing and without prostrating. I said, yeah, the prayer you saw him praying was a janazah prayer, is what you saw, right? There's no ruku' and there's no sajda. So he says that, you said that he gives testimony to that which is not seen, right? I mean, this is terrible, false testimony. He says, of course. He's saying, La ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammad Rasulullah. He's giving testimony that he believes in Allah without seeing Allah, and he has not met the Prophet ﷺ. He doesn't see the Prophet ﷺ. So that's a testimony that he's given. Okay? He says that, you say that he dislikes the haqq and that which is certain. He says, yes, because what is haqq? It is death. And everyone hates death. You said that he loves fitna. And I say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Inna amwalakum wa awladukum fitna, right? That your wealth and your children are a fitna, so he loves his wealth and he loves his children. And then he says that he runs away from the mercy of Allah. I say that when it's raining, he runs away from the rain, because a rain is a signification of the mercy of Allah. So when they hear this, they say, Ya Imam Abu Hanifa, like the way you function, the way you think is just truly extraordinary. And this is how he was. His environment, his backdrop, even when you look at his backdrop in terms of his piety. You know, the story about how his mother met his father is interesting, right? I'll try to narrate the best I can. But when they say that when his father, like he was passing by somewhere, his father was known to be a very pious man, that he picked an apple off a tree and just kept going. Then he realized that, I don't know whose apple this is, and he went to the owner's house. And he said, you know, I unjustly took this apple from you and I wanted to compensate you for that. Remember, he's a wealthy businessman, and he's very particular with what you may call mercantile morality. In other words, the fiqh of finance. He's very cautious of what he's earning and what. So he goes to the man of the house. He says, look, I took this apple and I didn't want to. And so what eventually culminates from that is the man says that if you're this pious, this is how much taqwa you have, why don't you marry my daughter? Right? So he gets married, and from there, Imam Abu Hanifa comes, right? He's born in Kufa. But the point is that his piety, his intelligence, all of it, the environment that he's brought up in is the thing that's making him who he is. So remember, I'd mentioned that that by the time at the end of his life, or very close to the end of his life, that because he was independent and because the ruler wanted him to be the head qadi, this led to a lot of problems. In fact, the fact that he refused this position, the Khalifa at the time actually had him tortured and jailed. In fact, just to show his quick-wittedness, there's an interesting thing where Abu Mansur, the Khalifa at the time, he goes to him, he says, why don't you become the chief qadi, the chief judge? So he says, look, I'm not qualified. So Abu Mansur says, you lie, you're a liar. So he says to him, he goes, well, if I'm a liar, then I'm not qualified, right? So what do you want me to do? Either I'm a liar and I'm not qualified, or I'm telling the truth and I'm not qualified, right? Point being is that he had this distance from kind of the politics of his time. So even when the Abbasid kind of revolt took place during the time of the Umayyads, he wasn't happy with the Umayyad leadership at the time. But he never called them out, right? He never said, like, I'm going to join this faction to go against the leadership and so on and so forth. A lot of that has to do with his own financial independence, right? Just as kind of another, how he kind of engaged with people, one of the groups that he engaged with were the Khawarij. Now, the Khawarij, these people, they were people who were quite literalist in a certain sense, and I mean that in a very negative sense, because they said that, look, if a person does a major sin, they have become kafir, all right? They've left the fold of Islam, okay? And so they had this type of belief, and they also said that whoever is not upon what we're upon, then they have left Islam and they should die, basically, right? They should be put to death because they have committed, they have left Islam, and so they're murtad, and therefore they should be killed. Okay, so they had this sort of really type of strange understanding. And so one day when Imam Abu Hanifa, he's in his gathering, and some of the Khawarij show up to his gathering, and he basically. The people there, people around him, students around him and other scholars, they start getting very worried. They start saying, like, this Khariji leader is coming, and they're going to put us to death. So Imam Abu Hanifa says, don't worry, like, it's fine. So he comes in, the Khariji leader, he comes to him and he says, takes out a sword and says, repent, make tawbah. So Imam Abu Hanifa says, for what? Like, why am I repenting? He says, I have heard that you believe that in the disputation between Ali and Muawiyah. Okay, now stop here for a second. Imam Ali radiallahu an, and Muawiyah, they had a disagreement, and Ali radiallahu an said that there should be an arbitrator. There should be someone who can decide who amongst us is correct. So the Khawarij, and specifically this Khariji leader, said that why did he have arbitration? Why did Ali he shouldn't have gotten it? Because if he knew he was right, then he doesn't need an arbitrator, because he's right, and he should have just kept going and whatever, killed Muawiyah or whatever that interpretation he gave. Okay? And by the way, this backdrop, it comes from this idea. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, inil hukmu illa lillah, that arbitration and rule is only for Allah. So if you take that literally, if Ali and Muawiyah are having an argument and another person comes with a hukm, then it's not only for Allah, right? It means a third party has now come who's not Allah and is therefore giving a ruling and arbitrating. Now obviously that's a very literalist approach. So they had this type of approach. So they come into the gathering of Imam Abu Hanifa, and they say that we heard that you hold that this was fine for Ali to do, to have an arbitrator, to have someone that can arbitrate the discussion. And so Imam Abu Hanifa says to him, he says, okay, so what do you want me to say? So he says that you believe in this dispute and that he was okay to have arbitration. So he says, look, if that's the case, you have already decided to put me to death. Because remember, they said that if you don't follow what they follow, you've left Islam, you get put. So he goes, look, you've already decided to put me to death, right? If you don't want to hear what I have to say, there's no point in me saying anything, because they were asking him, like, what do you say about this? He said, why should I say anything? You already decided to put me to death. And then Imam Abu Hanifa says, if you allow me, we can discuss the matter. So the man says, yes, I want to debate with you, because everyone knew Imam Abu Hanifa's reputation. So he was like, yes, I want to discuss the matter with you. He said, fine. Now, we could have the discussion, but how are we going to know who's right? So he takes one of his guys, he said, look, he will decide. So they start, they go, ready? Ready. Okay, let's decide. Let's go. Let's start this argument. Great. He said, you've already proven my argument, man. You assigned an arbitrator. Why are you knocking Ali radiallahu anh for assigning an arbitrator? It's like, what are you doing, man? Right? So, his dealing with the Khawarij, with the Mu'tazila, with all of these different groups, you find that his quick-wittedness would always come in handy, right? Especially in areas of fiqh and other things as well. When it came down to 5 minutes, okay. When it came to like people's personal issues, this is another aspect that when it comes to fiqh, when it comes to fatwa in general, when you give a ruling, this is very important when we understand that when a scholar gives a ruling, a lot of times there are a number of things that the scholar has to take into consideration. That's why general rulings can be quite dangerous. Like you go online and you ask ChatGPT, like what is the ruling on blah, 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 and it spits out something, and maybe it'll give you a link, maybe it won't. But aside from the fact that that's coming from a source that is, you know, like I said, its language source itself is problematic, aside from that, there's no conscious backdrop to a person that's not understanding the person that they're speaking to. When someone asks you for a ruling and you simply say, oh, this is halal, this is haram, you've actually done a major faux pas because you're not understanding the entirety of the context the person is coming from. Right? Someone asks you, look man, I had this argument with my wife, what do you think? Oh yeah, she's totally wrong, it's haram. You don't know anything, right, to be able to just say something like that, okay? However, when it came to Imam Abu Hanifa, he would take into consideration, again, because of him being at the center of business and he's interacting with people, variety of people, he understands, rahimahullah ta'ala, he understands that it is not just always a simple issue of this is like black and white. You have to take into consideration a multitude of things. People's behavior, people's backdrop, the benefit of the society, the benefit of the family, the benefit of the community. All of those things are part and parcel of you giving a fatwa, right? It was interesting that this man once comes to Imam Abu Hanifa, and I think I've mentioned this in the past before. He comes to him and he says, or actually this one evening he has an argument with his wife. And he tells her, he says, I swear by Allah, right, that if you don't speak to me, if you don't, I will not speak, I'm not going to speak to you until you speak to me. He tells his wife this. I swear by Allah, I'm not going to speak to you until you speak to me. So she says, well, I swear by Allah, I'm not going to speak to you until you speak to me. So now, they both go on their separate ways. And so now what happens is, she probably goes to the room, he probably goes to the couch, they didn't have couches back then, whatever, you know. And then all of a sudden something hits, a nadam, a regret, right? Like he's like, oh man, what did I do? So now he gets up, the husband, he starts asking the scholars. And every scholar tells him like, look man, this is a big problem. You have to give a kafara, you have to give something, some sort of money or something, repent and so on. So he's very down, depressed, until he says, let me just go ask Imam Abu Hanifa. So we asked Imam Abu Hanifa. Imam Abu Hanifa said, look, you don't even have to worry about any kafara, nothing like that. Just go talk to your wife, everything's fine. So he's like, okay, great, that's wonderful. And he's like, I swore by Allah. He's like, yeah, that's fine, don't worry about it, just go talk to your wife. So he goes home, and as he's on his way home, he runs across another scholar. And the scholar says, what did Imam Abu Hanifa say? And so this man says that, well, Imam Abu Hanifa said that I don't have to worry about a kafara or anything like that. I can just go talk to my wife. So he gets really angry. He says, let's go to the house of Imam Abu Hanifa. So they go into the house, they knock on the door, and the scholar asks Imam Abu Hanifa, he says, what did you tell him? So Imam Abu Hanifa said, yeah, what's the problem? Like, I told him what he should do. He said, how could you say that? He goes, okay, tell me again what happened. So he says that I got in an argument with my wife. I said, I swear by Allah, I'm not going to talk to you until you talk to me. And she said, I swear by Allah, I'm not going to talk to you until you talk to me. So Imam Abu Hanifa said, what's the problem? He said, I swear by Allah, I'm not going to talk to you until you talk to me. She said, saying, I'm not going to talk to you until you talk to me, effectively talking to him, his oath is filled. Khalas. Right? So he can go home and talk to her. Right? What's the problem? And so it's just that sort of sharpness, coupled with the cultural context, coupled with the fact that he's dealing with all of these different worldviews, really it's something that we have to take a look at and really marvel at the life of Imam Abu Hanifa, especially as we enter into a world that is full of different worldviews, dispositions, ideologies. Because one of the things that we learn from this is how do you now navigate this space in a way that you're still kind and decent and giving Muslims excuses and so on and so forth, and at the same time engaging in something that's you're at the center of, right? You and I, we don't necessarily have a choice. We go to work, we deal with a number of different issues, liberalism and feminism and secularism and all of the other isms and schisms. And so if anything we want to take from the life of Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala is that we're in a type of position that's much like his. Obviously many of us don't have the same quick-wittedness, but that methodology of being able to engage with our tradition in a way that's authentic, that starts with the tradition at the center and then engages with things. And this will be the last point, I promise. A lot of times what we do is we start with things outside of our tradition and then we move in and try to justify it with our tradition. And that approach is not something that Imam Abu Hanifa took. None of the scholars took that approach. They started with that one truth that is axiomatic across any of the madahib and any of the scholars, the Quran and the Sunnah. That is central. After that, now you use that as a vantage point to adjudicate between, okay, what can I take from this, that, whether it's artificial intelligence. Any technology is going to have positive things and negative things. Any technology. As you deal with artificial intelligence, you're going to have to take that into consideration. Don't jump in head first, be like, look at all these great things and ChatGPT, it's amazing, and I can do X, Y, and Z, and it's great, right? So we're moving from, basically having an actual sheikh to moving to having Sheikh Google, and now you have Mufti ChatGPT, right? That's not where we want to go. Real scholarship means real learning, coming to the masjid, sitting at the feet of scholars, taking in that tradition, because the tradition isn't just, kind of this artificial quick YouTube video that you're watching. It's what you take in from the actual presence of being with someone, right? And so you find, again, the life of Imam Abu Hanifa, he was interacting with real people that are coming to his market, that he's dealing with, real problems and real issues. That interaction is something that we have to keep central. Keep Islam central, the Quran and the Sunnah, and then move outwards. Don't go the opposite direction. So we'll go ahead and stop there. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless all of you. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow all of us to be able to navigate this modern world in a way that's authentic to our tradition, to the Quran and the Sunnah. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept from all of us all of the efforts you guys brought for coming out here. If there's anything that was said of benefit, it is all from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Any sort of mistakes, faux pas or anything like that, that's all from myself and from shaitan. Jazakumullah khair. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح. قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله.
لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. استووا واعتدلوا. Straight in line. Turn off your cell phones. Heel on the line. استووا. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. ومن أظلم ممن افترى على الله الكذب وهو يدعى إلى الإسلام والله لا يهدي القوم الظالمين. يريدون ليطفئوا نور الله بأفواههم والله متم نوره ولو كره الكافرون. هو الذي أرسل رسوله بالهدى ودين الحق ليظهره على الدين كله ولو كره المشركون. يا أيها الذين آمنوا هل أدلكم على تجارة تنجيكم من عذاب أليم تؤمنون بالله ورسوله وتجاهدون في سبيل الله بأموالكم وأنفسكم ذلكم خير لكم إن كنتم تعلمون. يغفر لكم ذنوبكم ويدخلكم جنات تجري من تحتها الأنهار ومساكن طيبة في جنات عدن ذلك الفوز العظيم. وأخرى تحبونها نصر من الله وفتح قريب وبشر المؤمنين. يا أيها الذين آمنوا كونوا أنصار الله كما قال عيسى ابن مريم للحواريين من أنصاري إلى الله قال الحواريون نحن أنصار الله. فآمنت طائفة من بني إسرائيل وكفرت طائفة فأيدنا الذين آمنوا على عدوهم فأصبحوا ظاهرين. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. سبح اسم ربك الأعلى الذي خلق فسوى والذي قدر فهدى والذي أخرج المرعى فجعله غثاء أحوى سنقرئك فلا تنسى إلا ما شاء الله إنه يعلم الجهر وما يخفى ونيسرك لليسرى فذكر إن نفعت الذكرى سيذكر من يخشى ويتجنبها الأشقى الذي يصلى النار الكبرى ثم لا يموت فيها ولا يحيا قد أفلح من تزكى وذكر اسم ربه فصلى بل تؤثرون الحياة الدنيا والآخرة خير وأبقى إن هذا لفي الصحف الأولى صحف إبراهيم وموسى. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. الله أكبر كبيرا الحمد لله كثيرا سبحان الله وبحمده استغفر الله استغفر الله استغفر الله لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له حمدك كثيرا يا حي.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Very special thanks and jazakallah khair to Sheikh Fahad Taslim for tonight's very enlightening lecture on the backdrop of Imam Abu Hanifa. So jazakallah khair, jazakumullah khair, and to all those who participated. If you missed it, you can see it online. Go to alsalammasjid.org and look for the live streaming, and you can view it there. Also, I'd like to invite everyone to please do participate in the Sunday morning's lecture on Tafsir in Action with Sheikh Hijazi. So please do come and join us for the community breakfast afterwards. Jazakumullah khair. And also special thanks to Brother Kamran Sabir for doing the short and sweet khatira after Isha every night while the Sheikh is out. We're expecting Sheikh Hijazi to come back tomorrow. He is moving his household from Maryland to the neighborhood next door to the masjid. So we're expecting to come tomorrow, inshallah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give them a safe and pleasant trip and make it easy for them. I mean, Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.